Serena Carter, a black high school student, was sitting at a small diner where her mother worked, studying her notes when she noticed a frail boy in a wheelchair shivering in the cold rain. Without hesitation, she rushed out, pulling him inside, offering him a warm meal and the comfort that the outside world had denied him. But what Serena didn't know was that, across the street, a man was watching the entire scene unfold. That man was the boy's father, and her act of kindness was about to change her life forever. Inside the small diner on the corner, Serena Carter sat with her head down, deeply focused on her notebook, reading each line under the pale glow of the fluorescent lights. The clock on the wall read 11:27 p.m. She had been there since the afternoon, trying to get some studying done while waiting for her mother, a woman working the night shift as a janitor, to finish cleaning the kitchen before closing time. 17 years old, intelligent and sharp, Serena's life had never been easy. Born into poverty, she had no choice but to fight for everything she had. A scholarship was the only way out of her struggling neighborhood, and she knew she had to work twice as hard as the other kids, especially the rich kids at school, who had never known what it was like to go hungry or worry about rent. A noise outside startled her. The cold wind swept through the door crack, bringing with it the damp air and the sound of tires splashing through the wet streets. Serena furrowed her brow, turned her head to look out the window, and immediately her heart clenched at what she saw. A boy, sitting huddled in an old wheelchair. Under the dim light of the Lexington Diner sign, the boy was trembling, his tiny hands gripping a torn, tattered blanket. His jacket was so thin it offered no protection against the bone-chilling cold. His wet, black hair clung to his forehead, and his large green eyes were wide with fear and confusion. Serena scanned the diner. A few remaining patrons seemed unaware of the boy. A middle-aged man was reading a newspaper in the corner. A young couple was absorbed in their phones. No one cared. A surge of anger rose within her. Why was no one doing anything? How could they sit here, drinking hot coffee, eating warm meals, while a child outside was shivering in the rain? Without thinking further, Serena stood up, pushing her chair back. As she walked toward the door, a voice came from behind. "Don't start trouble, Carter." Serena paused. She didn't need to turn around to know who had spoken. Karen, a middle-aged woman with meticulously styled blonde hair and squinted eyes full of disdain. She was a regular at the diner, but not the kind of customer Serena liked. "People like you always have to play the hero," Karen drawled, taking a sip of her coffee. "What, looking for pity again?" Serena clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. She knew the type. People who believed that those with money deserved everything, while the poor were meant to be forgotten. But Serena wasn't the type to stay silent. She turned around, locking eyes with Karen, her voice calm yet sharp. "I'm not doing this for pity. I'm doing it because I have a conscience, something you clearly don't." The diner fell silent. Serena knew she had crossed a dangerous line, but she didn't care. Karen's eyes widened, her lips pressed into a tight line. She scowled, but Serena no longer paid attention. She pushed open the door and stepped out into the rain. Cold. The raindrops hit her face as soon as she stepped off the diner's porch. But it didn't matter. Serena knelt beside the boy. "Are you okay?" Her voice softened, warmer now. The boy jumped, his eyes flashing with caution. "Who are you?" His voice trembled. Serena smiled gently. "Someone who doesn't want you to freeze out here." She glanced around. No one was passing by, no one was waiting. "Do you have anyone with you? Where are your parents?" The boy gripped the ragged blanket tighter, pursed his lips, then softly replied, "My dad told me to wait here." Serena's heart filled with anger. How long have you been here?" The boy fell silent, long enough that his hands had nearly lost all feeling. Serena took a deep breath. She couldn't let him stay here any longer. "Come inside with me, okay?" The boy hesitated, his eyes quickly scanning the diner's door. But in the end, the cold won over his fear. He nodded slightly. Serena bent down, gently pushing the wheelchair inside the diner. "What's your name?" The boy spoke in a quiet voice. "Daniel." "All right, Daniel, let me take care of you." She shut the door behind them, shutting out the cold rain. But Serena didn't know that, across the street, a cold, sharp pair of eyes had been watching her from the beginning. And this moment, her selfless kindness, was about to change her life forever. Serena gently pushed Daniel's wheelchair further inside the diner, where the warmth from the heater and the faint smell of toasted bread in the air could offer the boy some comfort. She grabbed a dry towel from the counter and quickly draped it over his shoulders. Daniel flinched slightly as the sudden warmth enveloped him, as if he had never known the gentle care of someone before. Serena pulled a chair beside him, her gaze never leaving the boy, a strange feeling swelling within her. Who was he waiting for? Why was he sitting out in the cold for so long without anyone coming to get him? "You said your dad was coming to get you?" she asked, her voice still soft but betraying a hint of doubt. Daniel nodded, but the hesitation in his deep green eyes couldn't be hidden. A slow shrug, a tight grip on the frayed blanket, then a vague answer. "Dad told me to wait here. He will come." Serena didn't believe him. Not because Daniel was lying, but because his voice was uncertain. The way he avoided her gaze, how his tiny fingers tightened around the torn blanket, all pointed to the fact that he didn't really know if his father would ever come back. She bit her lip, reluctant to press him further, but unable to ignore the obvious truth. Daniel had been out in the rain for too long, and no one had cared except her. Serena sighed. She didn't have much, but the one thing she never lacked was kindness. She pulled her plate of food forward, pushing the cheese sandwich and steaming bowl of tomato soup in front of Daniel. "Eat. You can't be hungry and freezing like this." Daniel looked at her confused. He hesitated, as if unsure whether he should accept. Perhaps he was too used to being turned away or treated like a burden. Serena recognized it immediately. "It's okay, I haven't eaten anything yet," she winked, giving him a reassuring smile. Daniel finally took the sandwich, biting a small piece. Instantly, his eyes lit up, as if the warmth of the food had awakened something inside him that had long been forgotten. "It's really good," he mumbled, almost in disbelief. Serena smiled softly, but her heart felt heavy. A boy like Daniel shouldn't have been so surprised by something as simple as a cheese sandwich. She leaned on the table, looking at him with genuine concern. "Does your dad make you wait like this often?" Daniel didn't answer right away. He bit his lip, avoiding her gaze. Then, after a long pause, he whispered, "He's always busy." Serena didn't reply, but inside a feeling of discomfort began to grow. Everything that happened inside the diner didn't escape the sharp eyes of a man sitting inside a Bentley parked quietly in the darkness. Raymond Holt leaned back into his premium leather seat, his eyes never leaving the scene before him. From the table where Daniel sat to the young woman talking to his son, every small detail was carefully recorded in his mind. Raymond wasn't the type to express his emotions easily. He had built a billion-dollar empire, and he had done it by putting logic above all. There was no room for compassion, no place for weakness. But right now, there was something bothering him. Daniel was still sitting there, eating the food that a complete stranger had given him. A girl who didn't know that his father was watching from afar. A girl who didn't expect anything in return. Not money, not recognition, not any privileges. Raymond didn't believe in kindness like that. His entire life had taught him one thing. No one does anything without an agenda. People help each other to get something in return. A relationship, a personal benefit, a debt to be called in at the right moment. That's how the world worked. But this girl, Serena Carter, didn't seem like she was expecting anything from Daniel. And that made Raymond uneasy. He reached for his phone and dialed a number. Only one ring before a calm, sharp voice answered, "Mr. Holt?" Raymond looked through the glass, his cold gaze locked on Serena. "Nora, I want you to find out everything about that girl. Name? Serena Carter, student, black, poor. Level of investigation." "Everything," Raymond emphasized, his voice deep and authoritative. "Parents' names, address, academic record, financial profile, and anything that can be used to control her." There was a brief pause before Nora answered in a completely professional tone. "I'll have the information on your desk by tomorrow morning." Raymond hung up, his eyes still fixed on the scene inside the diner. Serena didn't know that she had caught the attention of one of the most powerful men in the city. She didn't know that her kindness had put her in the crosshairs of someone who never believed in kindness, and she also didn't know that, from this night forward, her life would never be the same. Serena was bending down, wiping the tomato soup stain from Daniel's hand when the door to the diner suddenly swung open, bringing with it a blast of icy cold air and hurried footsteps. She barely had time to look up before a sharp voice sliced through the diner's quiet atmosphere. "Stay away from him." Serena furrowed her brows, feeling the tension in the air before she could even understand what was happening. A middle-aged woman with meticulously styled blonde hair stood at the door, her eyes wide in disbelief, as though Serena had committed an unforgivable crime. She was wearing a dark fur coat, her lips painted a bright red, pressed together in a thin, sharp line. The expression on her face was one of feigned outrage mixed with clear contempt. Serena didn't need to ask who she was. Karen, the typical type of person Serena knew all too well. Karen sneered as she scanned the diner with disdain, but quickly focused on Serena, more specifically, the boy, Daniel, sitting beside her. "I knew it. It's always people like you, always looking for trouble." "What the hell are you talking about?" Serena lowered her voice, but the irritation was clear in her eyes. Karen didn't bother responding. Instead, she pulled out her phone, dialed a number, and held it to her ear. "I'm at Lexington Diner. There's a kidnapped child here. Yes, a black girl. I need the police here immediately." Inside the diner, the atmosphere suddenly became suffocating. Serena felt her body freeze for a moment, then immediately heat up with anger. She clenched her fists, trying to control the surge of rage rising in her chest. "What did you just say?" She looked directly at Karen, her voice cold, each word sharp. "You think I'm going to let this go?" Karen raised an eyebrow, her tone full of challenge, as if she were so used to being the one believed in situations like this. Serena scanned the diner. The looks from the patrons had changed. At first, they had quietly observed, but now they were looking at her as if she had actually done something wrong. A man furrowed his brow. A young couple whispered to each other. They believed her. No proof, no reason, just because Karen was a middle-aged white woman, and Serena was a black girl in a suspicious situation. She was too familiar with this feeling. Serena stood up, facing Karen, her voice calm but sharper than before. "Did you hear what the boy said? I didn't kidnap anyone. Daniel is sitting here having dinner, and I didn't see anyone in this diner object to that until you walked in." "Oh, don't play innocent," Karen sneered, a malicious grin spreading across her face. "I know this game. It's always the good person saving the poor child and then exploiting people's pity. You think you can fool me?" Serena felt her fists tighten, but she knew this was a trap set by Karen. If she lost control, if she got angry, it would only give Karen's accusations more weight. Before Serena could respond, a weak but firm voice cut through the tension. "She didn't do anything wrong." The diner went silent. Karen's eyes widened, as if she couldn't believe the boy she was trying to protect was now standing up for Serena. Daniel looked up at her, his green eyes flashing with defiance that hadn't been there before. "She helped me. She gave me food. I was so cold, I waited a long time, and my dad still hasn't come." The boy's words struck at Karen's confidence. She flustered, blinking rapidly, then immediately shifted to a defensive posture. "You don't understand, sweetheart. People like her. We can't trust them." Before Serena could respond, the door to the diner opened again. A woman walked in, dressed in a black leather coat, her blonde hair tied up neatly, her sharp eyes calculating. Her steps were deliberate, but every movement seemed to carry weight, as though she had controlled this situation before even stepping foot inside. Nora Winters. Serena didn't know who she was, but something about this woman made her instantly wary. Nora didn't look at Serena first. She went straight to Daniel, bent down, and placed a hand on his shoulder gently but authoritatively. "Daniel, your dad is waiting outside in the car." Daniel immediately stiffened. He wasn't relieved or happy. He was scared. Serena recognized it right away. Nora looked up, facing Serena for the first time. She smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "I'm Daniel's aunt." Serena furrowed her brows, her instincts immediately alerting her. Nora was lying, but there was nothing Serena could do. Karen, now with someone who seemed more authoritative to back up her story, stood with her arms crossed, a smug expression on her face. Daniel looked up at Serena, as though he wanted to say something but couldn't. Serena looked into the boy's confused eyes, and a strange sense of unease washed over her. Nora pushed Daniel's wheelchair toward the door, and Daniel only had time to glance back at Serena with a look of regret, panic, and something that resembled a silent cry for help. Serena could only stand there and watch, and she knew this wasn't over. Serena stood frozen inside the diner, her eyes still fixed on the door that had just slammed shut behind Nora and Daniel. A sense of unease crept into her thoughts, like a cold breeze slipping through the cracks of a door that could never be fully closed. Daniel didn't want to leave. He had been scared, but not because of her, rather because of the people who had just taken him away. Serena couldn't do anything. She turned back to the diner, feeling the weight of silent yet judgmental gazes still lingering on her. Some of the patrons looked awkward, but no one spoke up in her defense. Karen had left, but the subtle accusation she had left behind still hung in the air. Serena sighed, grabbed her backpack, and left the diner. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the street was still wet, reflecting the dim streetlights. She quickened her pace down the cracked sidewalk of Lexington Avenue, feeling the December chill seep through her layers of clothing. Her apartment was on the third floor of an old building, where the smell of aged paint mixed with the dampness of peeling walls. When she opened the door, darkness and silence enveloped her. Her mother wasn't home. She was still working the night shift at an office building nearly 10 miles away. Serena threw her backpack onto the chair, slowly removed her coat, but the discomfort refused to leave her mind. Daniel was still with her. Something was wrong. She sensed it in the way he clutched the blanket, in the way his eyes furtively sought reassurance from her just before he was pushed out of the diner. But she didn't know what to do with that truth. Serena sighed, rubbing her temples, trying to shake off the tension that wrapped around her like an invisible rope. But before she could lie down on her bed, a knock came at the door, a midnight knock. Serena jumped, her body tensing instinctively. No one ever came to her apartment at this hour. No one was supposed to be here. The knock came again, deep, steady, not in a rush, but also not hesitant. She moved to the door, placing her hand on the doorknob but not opening it. She pressed her ear to the door, took a deep breath, and peeked through the peephole. A man stood there, tall, wearing a long black coat, the collar turned up, his shiny black leather shoes untouched by the wet street, though the ground beneath was still soaked. His salt and pepper hair and steely gray eyes exuded a cold, sharp aura. Serena didn't need anyone to tell her who he was. Raymond Holt. She took a deep breath and then opened the door, just a crack, enough to see him but not let him in. Carter. His voice was low, not loud but commanding. Serena didn't move, her eyes narrowing with caution. "What are you doing here?" Her voice was anything but welcoming. Raymond stared at her, as though weighing whether or not to answer. Finally, he slowly withdrew one hand from his coat pocket, pulling out something from inside. A black business card. "We need to talk." Serena didn't take the card, nor did she step back. "I don't think you and I have anything to talk about." Raymond tilted his head slightly, as if she had just said something foolish. "Is that so?" His voice was calm, but with a hint of hidden meaning. "You helped my son. I'll repay the debt." Serena couldn't hide the surprise that flashed in her eyes. "What?" Raymond didn't blink. "No one does anything for free," he said slowly, each word emphasized as if it were an unchangeable truth. "You helped Daniel. Now, I'll help you." Serena felt a coldness seep into her chest, but she kept her tone calm. "I didn't help him to expect anything in return." Raymond chuckled softly, without a hint of warmth. "That's something I don't believe." Serena tightened her grip on the door, a natural reflex when standing before a predator. "I don't need your pity." "Pity?" Raymond raised an eyebrow, almost amused. "You think this is pity? Then what is it?" Serena shot back, her tone colder now. Raymond took a step forward, but kept enough distance to respect her space. "This is a deal," he said slowly. "I don't believe in pity, I believe in exchange." Serena glared at him, disgust rising in her throat. "I'm not a commodity for you to bargain with." "I'm not saying you're a commodity," Raymond replied. "I'm saying this is an opportunity." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a black envelope, placing it on the edge of the door. "A full scholarship," he said, "and an internship position at Holt Dynamics." Serena stood still, her eyes drifting away from Raymond to look at the envelope. It was thick, heavy. She knew it wasn't just an offer letter inside. Raymond was testing her. "You can refuse." His voice was calm, unhurried. "But if I were you, I'd consider it." Serena clenched her hands at her sides. Every muscle in her body tensed. She wanted to refuse immediately. She didn't want to be involved with this man, with his company, with his world. But at the same time, she couldn't ignore the truth. This scholarship could change her life. She looked directly into Raymond's eyes, unyielding. "I'll think about it." Raymond nodded slightly, not surprised by her response. "I hope you choose wisely." Then he turned and walked away, leaving Serena standing at the doorstep with a decision that could change everything. Serena stared at the black envelope on the table. Her small apartment was so quiet that she could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall. She had spent the whole night thinking about Daniel, about the look on the boy's face when he was pushed out of the diner, about Raymond Holt, the powerful man she couldn't read, and about herself, about the dreams she had chased all her life. The dream of attending a good university, the dream of not living day by day like her mother once did. And then, the next morning, she walked into Holt Dynamics, officially stepping into a world she never imagined would belong to her. Holt Dynamics was unlike any place Serena had ever been. The skyscraper reflected the bright sunlight. The vast marble corridors were cold, and the air was filled with the scent of polished oak and expensive coffee. Serena could feel the eyes on her as soon as she stepped into the lobby. It wasn't a welcoming gaze, it wasn't curiosity. It was evaluation. The tailored suits, the shiny leather shoes, the high-end phones swiping quickly in their hands. They looked at her as if she didn't belong here. And standing among all of them, Nora Winters. The woman stepped out of the elevator, her blonde hair tightly tied up, her eyes sharp as a knife. She wore a perfectly fitted black suit with no wrinkles, no mistakes in her posture. When she saw Serena, she squinted slightly, then approached. "Miss Carter?" Nora's voice was deep and firm, without a trace of emotion. Serena nodded, trying to keep her voice calm. "Good morning, Miss Winters." Nora gave a slight smirk, not a smile, but a sign of dissatisfaction. Holt Dynamics is not a public school. Here, if you want to survive, you must understand one thing. No one will give you any concessions. No one cares about what you've done, only about what you can do. "Good, because I'm not here looking for concessions," Serena responded, her eyes unblinking. A brief silence followed. Then Nora turned and walked away without saying another word. Serena didn't need Nora to say anything more. Just by the way she moved and the way those around her subtly showed their respect, Serena knew that Nora was not someone to be underestimated. But Serena wasn't the type to be easily crushed. She took a deep breath and followed Nora, stepping into the heart of the empire she was about to fight to survive in. The boardroom at Holt Dynamics was the perfect embodiment of power. Glass walls looking out over the entire city, a 12-seat oak table, and a large screen displaying financial data like numbers determining the fates of thousands. At the head of the table, Philip Langford, the senior director, a man in his 50s with silver hair and cold, pale blue eyes. Langford didn't look up when Serena entered. He was busy reviewing documents on the screen, his expression making it clear that Serena wasn't worth his attention. But when Raymond entered, Langford raised an eyebrow and finally shifted his attention to her. "So, this is the new addition Mr. Holt brought in?" he said, his voice tinged with mockery. Serena stared directly at him, not flinching. "Serena Carter, Mr. Holt's intern." Langford smirked slightly, throwing a look of evaluation at Raymond as if asking, "Is this really serious? Do you know why you're here, Miss Carter?" Serena didn't blink. "I'm here to work." "No, you're here for another reason." Langford leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "You're here to improve the image, to give Holt Dynamics a nice story about giving opportunities to those less fortunate." The room became eerily silent. Serena felt every cell in her body tense, but instead of getting angry, she gave a small, wry smile. "So, you think I'm just a PR stunt?" "I don't think." "I know," Langford replied immediately, his voice sharp. Serena looked around the room, sensing the eyes of others waiting to see how she would react. She could lower her head, remain silent, and accept the position Langford had tried to impose on her. Or she could fight back. Serena chose the second option. Mr. Langford, if Holt Dynamics needs a PR stunt, they picked the wrong person. I'm not here to make anyone's profile look good. I'm here because I have value, and I will prove it. She pushed a file towards Langford, her voice calm, but each word was firm and sharp as a knife. You're trying to move the company's production overseas to cut costs, right? But do you know what happens after 3 years? Foreign labor is cheaper, but when they start demanding raises, operational costs will rise by 30% compared to now. Add in the risks of tariffs and shipping, and you won't save much. Actually, it could cost the company millions of dollars. I don't think our investors will like those numbers. Langford paused, his eyes sharpening. Raymond, who had been silent up to this point, suddenly cracked a brief smile. Go on, Carter. Serena looked straight at Langford, knowing she had just scored the first point in this battle. Langford didn't respond immediately, but his expression said it all. He could no longer dismiss her. Serena had officially stepped into Holt Dynamics, and she wasn't leaving easily. Serena walked out of the conference room with a strange feeling. She had just had her first battle with Philip Langford, one of the most powerful senior executives at Holt Dynamics, and she had won. Although he didn't admit it, the change in his gaze, in his demeanor, said it all. She had proven that she wasn't a puppet in anyone's hands. But just as she started to feel like she could carve out a place for herself in this world, the next storm hit. 2 days later, the Holt Dynamics building was shaken. An important internal document, a detailed financial report on the company's market expansion strategy, had been leaked to the press. No one knew where it came from. But within an hour of the news breaking, Serena Carter's name was at the top of the suspect list. She was immediately summoned. The conference room, where she had just won a victory not long ago, had now turned into a battlefield. All the senior executives were present, their faces heavy. On the large screen was the headline from a top New York financial paper, Holt Dynamics Scandal. Who's behind the data leak? Serena clenched her fists, realizing the email on the screen had been sent from her account. What the hell is this? She spoke, losing her calm. Langford, sitting directly across from her, wore a smug smile. Why don't you tell us, Carter? How did this document get leaked from your account? Serena felt her heart pounding in her chest, but she wasn't scared. She took a deep breath, keeping her voice calm but sharp. I didn't do this. Maybe someone used my account, but I didn't send that email. Really? Another executive spoke up, his tone cold. You're just an intern. How would anyone want to set you up? Serena smirked, but there was no amusement in it. That's exactly why, because I'm an intern, I'm the easiest target. The room fell into a brief silence. Serena turned to Raymond, the man still sitting at the head of the table, staring at her. Do you believe me? Raymond hesitated for only a second, a very brief moment, but enough for Serena to sense something. In the end, he didn't answer directly. It doesn't matter what I believe. What matters is what the board believes. Serena felt a cold chill run down her spine. He wasn't protecting her. He wasn't on her side. The board was the only thing he cared about. She was a pawn, and if he had to sacrifice one to keep his chessboard intact, he would do it without hesitation. Serena clenched her fists, trying to suppress the feeling of betrayal. She could lose everything right here. Suddenly, another voice broke through the heavy atmosphere. I don't think Carter did this. All eyes turned to Nora Winters, the woman who had been silent up until now, but was now crossing her arms, her gaze sharp as a knife. Langford raised an eyebrow, mocking. Oh? And who do you think did this, Winters? Nora glanced briefly at Serena, then slowly spoke. I checked the system last night. The leaked email was sent from a proxy address, but was set up to display Carter's address. It's a setup. A murmur ran through the room. Serena couldn't hide her surprise. Nora was backing her up? But Nora wasn't finished. Carter may be an intern, but she's not stupid. If she had actually intended to leak the document, she wouldn't have left such an obvious trail. Serena felt a flicker of hope ignite within her. Langford wasn't pleased. So, you're saying someone tried to frame Carter? And we should believe that? Nora responded immediately, without hesitation. I'm saying that if we fire Carter right now without a proper investigation, Holt Dynamics will make a huge mistake. The room fell silent again, but this time there was a shift. Raymond raised an eyebrow looking at Nora, then back at Serena. She wasn't alone anymore, and someone had just made a big mistake thinking they could make her disappear so easily. Raymond took a deep breath, then slowly leaned back in his chair. We will investigate, he declared. Carter will not be fired. Not yet. Not yet? Langford gritted his teeth, clearly unhappy with this decision. Raymond didn't care. Winters, you have 48 hours to find the proof. If you can't clear Carter's name, I won't be able to protect her. Serena pursed her lips but nodded. Then we need to start now, Nora said, not wasting any time. Raymond looked at Serena, and for a brief moment she saw something in his eyes, a judgment, a curiosity, but not exactly trust. She still had to fight for herself, but at least she now had an ally. Nora turned to Serena, tilting her head with a silent signal. Let's go, Carter. We have a traitor to expose. Serena nodded and followed her out of the conference room. She had no intention of being the easy pawn to be discarded, and she swore whoever had set her up, whoever they were, would regret underestimating her. Serena walked quickly behind Nora out of the meeting room, her mind a whirl of thoughts. 48 hours to prove her innocence. It was a short amount of time to uncover a person who had planned to trap her from the start, but long enough to realize that she could trust no one in this building except herself. And perhaps Nora. The hallway of Holt Dynamics' office felt more suffocating than ever. Serena could feel the furtive glances following her, the whispers just quiet enough for her not to catch the words, but she knew they were talking about her. They thought she had lost. They thought she would be swept out of here like a nameless failure. They were wrong. Nora walked briskly toward the elevator, her face as cold as if the events of the meeting had been nothing more than an insignificant discussion. But as soon as the steel doors closed behind them, she sighed, turned to Serena with a look that was tired yet calculating. You know, Carter, I used to think you weren't worth my time. Serena crossed her arms, unfazed. Then why are you on my side now? Nora smirked, but didn't smile. Because I hate people who think they can manipulate this game without anyone noticing. She pressed a button on the elevator panel, and instead of heading to the ground floor, they went straight down to the basement, the location of Holt Dynamics' data center. As they entered the data room, the LED lights flickered along the server racks, reflecting on Serena's tense face. An IT employee was sitting at a screen, his hands flying over the keyboard, but when he saw Nora, he immediately jumped to his feet. Ms. Winters, I've done exactly as you asked. Here are all the system access logs from 3 days ago. Nora nodded, gesturing for him to move aside. She slid her finger across the screen, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the massive list of data. Serena stood close by, trying to follow what was being revealed. What are we looking for? any suspicious access to the system, especially accounts routed through a proxy server. Nora continued to scroll through the data, but soon she paused, her eyes sharp. Here it is. Serena leaned in to take a closer look. An account had logged into the system just minutes before the email was sent. Username: EC-2005, Serena read aloud. EC? Who in the company has those initials? Nora looked at her, lips pressed tight. Eric Calloway. A cold shock ran down Serena's spine. You mean, a senior executive set me up? Nora nodded, but her expression remained calm, as though she had anticipated this. Calloway isn't just an executive. He's a sly fox in this world. He's positioned between Raymond Holt's and Philip Langford's sides, but loyal to neither. He plays it safe, but when necessary, he can stab anyone in the back. Serena felt her throat dry. A person in such a high position like Calloway, with access to so much critical company data, why would he target her? A powerless intern. The answer was simple. Someone ordered him to do this, Serena said slowly, each word deliberate. Or he did it to protect himself, Nora added. Maybe Langford wanted you eliminated, but it's also possible that Calloway had his own reasons for clearing the path, and if he wanted to tarnish Holt Dynamics to manipulate the stock market, you'd be the perfect pawn. Serena felt a surge of anger rise in her chest. She had fought to prove herself, and now she was about to be ruined by a power game she hadn't even fully understood. I'm not letting him get away with this, she said in a low but firm voice. Nora studied her for a moment before nodding. Then get ready, Carter, because when we expose Calloway, this won't be a quiet battle anymore. They had no time to waste. Nora sent a security query, pulling up all of Calloway's login records from the system, along with any unusual transactions he had made in recent days. When the screen loaded, Serena saw something that made her hold her breath. A series of large financial transactions had been made just before the documents were leaked. He bet on Holt Dynamics stock falling, Serena exclaimed. Nora pressed her lips together, her eyes sharp as a blade. He didn't just set you up. He's exploiting this company to profit for himself. Serena felt the fury build within her like a tidal wave. Calloway had trapped her to cover up a bigger scheme. He never expected her to fight back. Nora closed the file, her eyes locking with Serena's. We have what we need. Now, there's only one question left. Serena raised an eyebrow, waiting. What will we do with it? She took a deep breath, then stared directly at the screen. We'll show him that I'm not a pawn to be eliminated. Serena knew that tomorrow she would step into a battle bigger than anything she had faced before. But this time, she wouldn't be alone. And she wouldn't back down. The next morning, Serena entered the conference room with more determination than ever before. No longer the intern who had been accused, no longer a pawn that could be discarded. Today, she was the one exposing one of the most powerful people at Holt Dynamics. The large conference room was filled with a heavy atmosphere. Outside the glass windows, New York City was still bustling, but inside, the tension was palpable, as if the room itself was a taut string about to snap. All the top executives of Holt Dynamics were present, individuals whose decisions could make the company's stock price fluctuate wildly with a single move. Raymond Holt sat at the head of the table, his eyes cold and calculating, watching Serena walk in like a predator sizing up its prey. And her main adversary today was Eric Calloway, the man who had tried to destroy her, but hadn't expected her to fight back. The powerful man sat at the corner of the table, his demeanor calm, though Serena could see his hand gripping the table tightly, as if trying to control his own tension. But he knew. He knew the storm was coming. "Miss Carter," a voice suddenly broke the silence. Philip Langford, who had looked down on her during their first meeting, now stared at her with a mix of expectation and challenge. "Do you have a reason for calling us here this morning? I hope you're not wasting our time with a desperate defense." Serena didn't falter. She walked up to the table and placed a USB drive down, calmly looking Langford in the eye. "I'm not here to defend myself," she said steadily, without a hint of hesitation. "I'm here to show you who the real traitor is." Nora, sitting in the corner of the room, quietly pressed a button on her computer, and immediately the large screen displayed the data from last night's investigation. The room fell silent. Lines of numbers, financial transactions, and traces of a sophisticated plot slowly revealed themselves before their eyes. Eric Calloway made a series of financial transactions just before Holt Dynamics documents were leaked to the press. Serena pointed to the screen. He bet on the company's stock drop right before the scandal broke. That means he knew this would happen. She looked directly at Calloway, her voice sharp as a knife cutting through the heavy air. Because he's the one who orchestrated it all. Eric Calloway leaned back in his chair, but Serena could see him trying to control his breathing, hiding his discomfort. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice trying to stay calm, "your accusations have no solid evidence. Anyone could access the system. Anyone could make stock transactions. But no one but you had access to the leaked documents." Serena shot back immediately, not allowing him to manipulate the conversation. "And no one but you had the motive. If Holt Dynamics were damaged, you'd make millions from betting on the stock's decline. That's not a coincidence." Raymond Holt suddenly spoke up, breaking the tension in the room. "Calloway." His voice was steady but authoritative, like a sharp blade cutting through thin ice. "Do you have anything to say?" Calloway gritted his teeth, looking around the room as though searching for an escape, but no one spoke in his defense. The powerful people in this room had started to smell danger, and no one wanted to be associated with a failure. He was cornered. Calloway opened his mouth, but no words were strong enough to deny the truth before him. Serena looked straight at Raymond, her eyes unwavering. "You have enough evidence now. What will you do?" Raymond didn't answer immediately. He leaned back in his chair, staring at Calloway as though weighing whether the man was worth keeping. But then, the decision was made. "Eric Calloway," Raymond said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "You're fired, effective immediately." No one in the room objected. No one tried to defend Calloway, because the power in this room belonged to Raymond Holt, and once he made a decision, no one could reverse it. Calloway was destroyed on the spot. He stood frozen, unable to believe he had truly lost. But Serena didn't look at him anymore. She looked straight at Raymond, and for a brief moment she saw something in his eyes, a hint of respect that hadn't been there before. As Calloway was escorted out of the room, Serena felt her body lighten a little. But she knew the real battle was far from over. She had proven her innocence. She had survived the first trap. But she had also drawn the attention of those more powerful than her. Raymond Holt had stood by her today, but there was no guarantee he would always stand by her in the future. Serena took a deep breath, looking out the glass window where the New York sunlight still shone down on the bustling streets. She had won one battle, but the real war was still ahead. Serena stood before the office window, gazing down at the sprawling city below. The lights of New York began to flicker as dusk settled in, but her mind had no room for peace. The morning meeting had ended with Calloway being ousted, but Serena knew she couldn't rest. The real storm was still ahead. By exposing Calloway, she had not only protected her own reputation but had also pushed herself into a more dangerous position. She was no longer an anonymous intern in the eyes of the board. Now they would be watching her every move, challenging her to see if she was truly worthy. And the first challenge came immediately. An email from Raymond Holt popped up on her screen, consisting of just one line. Meeting, 7 p.m., Orion Group. She had heard that name before. Orion Group, one of Holt Dynamics' most crucial partners. If the deal failed, the company would lose millions, not to mention the severe damage to its reputation. She didn't have time to wonder why she was pulled into such an important negotiation. She only knew one thing. If she didn't prove herself right now, she wouldn't get a second chance. The tension in the meeting room was palpable the moment Serena stepped inside. On the opposite side of the table was Philip Langford, who had always tried to undermine her from day one. He crossed his arms, his eyes clearly skeptical as he looked at her. "Miss Carter, are you sure you understand the situation? This isn't an intern exercise." Serena didn't answer immediately. She walked to the empty chair next to Raymond, carefully placed her documents on the table, and then slowly turned to Langford. "No, Mr. Langford, this is not an exercise. This is an opportunity for us to save an important deal." She looked him straight in the eye, unflinching. "And if I'm sitting here, it means Mr. Holt believes I can handle it." Raymond gave a small smirk but said nothing. Langford just pursed his lips, but Serena knew he couldn't argue, because whether he liked it or not, she had earned her spot with her own abilities. Across the table, 3 men in dark suits from Orion Group quietly observed the exchange. The leader of the group, Richard Vaughn, lightly tapped his fingers on the table, as if waiting to see if she had anything worth hearing. "Miss Carter, I hear you are the new addition to the team at Holt Dynamics," he said, his voice even but sharp. "Why should I trust that you will offer a better proposal than Mr. Langford or Mr. Holt could?" A challenge, a provocation. Serena didn't falter. "Because I don't look at the numbers the old-fashioned way they do." She opened the documents, pointing to an important chart. "Holt Dynamics' current proposal will help Orion save 12% on operational costs over the next 2 years. But if we adjust the partnership model the way I've proposed, that number will increase to at least 18% without any need for layoffs." The room fell silent. Serena could feel all eyes on her. She continued. "The automation system that Holt Dynamics is developing won't require Orion to invest additional infrastructure costs. Instead, we can implement it in phases, allowing Orion to maintain cash flow while still achieving higher performance." Richard Vaughn tilted his head, his expression no longer the bored one it had been at the start. "Are you sure about that?" Serena nodded, confident. "Absolutely sure, and I have the numbers to prove it." She slid another stack of documents toward him, waiting for his reaction. Richard Vaughn picked up the documents, flipping through the pages, his eyes slowly scanning the figures as if searching for a weakness. But he found none. Serena had done her research too thoroughly. She had prepared too well. Finally, Vaughn set the documents down on the table and looked directly at Raymond. "If Holt Dynamics agrees to this proposal, Orion will sign the contract today." Serena took a deep breath, maintaining her composure, but inside she was a storm. She had done it. She had just saved the company from losing a crucial partner. Raymond Holt, the man who always judged people based on their practical value, turned to look at her with an expression she had never seen before. Not doubt, not challenge, but respect. Philip Langford frowned, but he couldn't say anything to deny the reality. Serena had just proven that she wasn't merely surviving in this world, she could dominate it. Raymond turned to Vaughn, extending his hand. Deal secured. Vaughn shook his hand, but before getting up to leave the meeting room, he glanced at Serena one last time. Miss Carter, I will be watching your progress. The statement wasn't a threat, it was an acknowledgement. Serena stood, keeping her back straight, but inside, she knew that today she had gained something more important than this deal. She had earned a real place at Holt Dynamics. She turned to Raymond, waiting to see what he would say. Raymond looked at her for a brief moment before giving a slight nod. Well done, Carter. Just 4 simple words. But to Serena, those 4 words meant more than any amount of money. Because for the first time, she was no longer an outsider. She had become a part of the game. Serena walked out of the meeting room, her breath still steady, but inside, a storm had just settled. She had just secured an important victory, not only with the Orion Group, but also with herself. She had forced all the powerful people in Holt Dynamics to take her seriously. And, most importantly, Raymond Holt had respected her. But that didn't mean she could let her guard down. She had seen how the world worked. The powerful don't protect the weak. The powerful exploit the weak, or discard them. Serena had no intention of being anyone's pawn. But there was one thing she couldn't ignore. Daniel. The boy had been on her mind for days now, ever since he had been pushed out of the diner by Nora that rainy night. His eyes stayed with her, haunting her thoughts. Daniel wasn't like other kids. He wasn't the typical rich kid everyone imagined, the kind who was arrogant, thoughtless, and lived in a world of fake luxury. He was quiet, but there was something about him that made Serena feel that he was used to being left behind. And that bothered her. She couldn't forget the look on the boy's face when he first took the grilled cheese sandwich she gave him. He looked at it as if it were the most precious thing in the world. And that made Serena angrier than anything else. Not with Daniel, not with herself, but with Raymond Holt. How could a man who had everything, power, wealth, a multi-billion-dollar company, let his son sit out in the rain, huddled up like a forgotten child? Now, she wanted answers. Serena walked straight into Raymond's office without knocking. The secretary looked surprised, but before she could speak, Raymond looked up from his desk. His eyes met hers with no sign of surprise. It seemed he had expected her to do this. Miss Carter, I don't recall having scheduled a meeting with you at this hour. Serena didn't flinch. I'm not here to talk about work. Raymond tilted his head slightly, his gaze sharpening. Then what about? Serena looked him in the eye, her voice steady and resolute. About Daniel. She saw something flash in Raymond's eyes, a brief flicker of caution, a defensive response she hadn't seen before, but it only lasted a second. Then Raymond leaned back in his chair, interlocking his fingers, his voice unchanged. I don't think that's any of your business. Well, then you're wrong, Serena replied immediately. I've seen the boy. I've talked to him. You can fool others, but I'm not blind. You're letting your son fend for himself. Raymond fell silent, but Serena could see the tension in his clenched jaw. She pressed on, not giving him a chance to interrupt. I don't care how much money you have. I don't care how many companies you control, but I care about Daniel, and if you're not going to do anything to make sure he doesn't feel abandoned, then at least I will. The room grew so silent that Serena could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her chest. Raymond didn't immediately respond. Instead, he stood up, walked over to the window, and crossed his arms, as if considering something very important. "You think you know something about my son, Carter?" Serena didn't back down. "I know enough to understand that he deserves more than this." Raymond turned around, the first time shedding his usual indifferent exterior. His gaze was no longer just an assessment. This time, it was a real challenge. "If you truly think you can understand Daniel, then go ahead and try. But don't say I didn't warn you when you find out things are not as simple as you think." Serena narrowed her eyes, but she knew he had just allowed her to step into a territory no one had ever been allowed to touch before. 2 days later, Serena stood at the gates of Daniel's boarding school. She wasn't sure if Raymond was testing her, or if he actually wanted her to care for Daniel, but she didn't need his permission to do so. She spotted the boy sitting alone on a bench, his green eyes focused on a book, though his expression wasn't fully engaged. He was alone. Serena walked slowly toward him, not rushing. "Hey, kid." Daniel looked up, his eyes widening with surprise when he recognized her. "Serena? What are you doing here?" Serena smiled gently, then sat down beside him. "Sometimes I think you could use someone to visit." Daniel looked at her for a long moment, then smiled faintly, a small but genuine smile. "I think I could use that too." Serena's heart sank. She didn't know what had really happened between Daniel and Raymond, but she knew one thing for sure: this boy didn't deserve to be abandoned. And if Raymond Holt couldn't see that, then she would be the one to do it for him. Serena stared at Daniel for a long moment, watching how he gripped his book tightly, as though it were the only thing keeping him grounded in a world full of expectations and pressure. She couldn't fully comprehend everything he had been through, but she could feel it. This boy was used to being pushed to the margins, even though he bore the Holt name, and that made her even more determined. She wouldn't let Raymond treat this boy's life as just another business project, something that could be measured by numbers and reports. But Serena didn't know that the real battle between her and Raymond wasn't just about Daniel. A bigger conflict awaited them, and this time, neither of them would back down. 3 days later, Serena walked into Raymond Holt's office, ready to face him. Before her was a new contract spread out across his desk, a multi-billion-dollar merger that Holt Dynamics was pursuing with a partner company. But the issue wasn't the numbers. It was the true cost of what it would bring. She had spent the entire night going over the documents, and what she found made it impossible for her to stay silent. "I can't support this," Serena said as she entered, her voice cold and resolute. Raymond looked up from the documents, tilting his head as if she had just said something strange. "Miss Carter, I don't recall needing your consent to make a decision." Serena ignored his sarcasm and walked straight to the desk, pushing the documents toward him. "If you sign this, Holt Dynamics will acquire Intratech, and that means over 3,000 of their employees will be laid off immediately." "And?" Raymond replied, unfazed. Serena felt a surge of anger rise within her. "And you don't see anything wrong with that?" Raymond leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms, his sharp gray eyes locking onto hers. "Carter, I don't think you understand how the world works. This is business, not charity." Serena clenched her fists. "This isn't just business, Raymond. These are people. Families who will lose their income, children who will go without food on their tables just because you want to increase profits by a few percent. I want to increase profits not because I like bigger numbers, but because it's necessary for this company's survival." Raymond replied, his tone calm but with an underlying warning. "Number, you're doing this because you can, and because you think no one is brave enough to challenge you." The room fell silent. Serena knew she had just crossed a dangerous line. Raymond wasn't someone who liked being questioned, especially by someone like her, a person he had once seen as a mere pawn in his game. But she wasn't a pawn anymore. She was the challenger. Raymond stood up, slowly walking toward the window, gazing down at the bustling city below. "Do you know how long it took me to build Holt Dynamics to what it is today?" Serena didn't respond. 30 years, he said, his voice low but heavy with weight. 30 years of difficult decisions. 30 years of putting the company above everything else, including family, including myself. And now you stand in front of me, someone who has never carried the responsibility of thousands of people, and you tell me I'm wrong. Serena clenched her jaw. Not every difficult decision is the right one. Raymond turned around, locking eyes with her, his gaze sharp as a knife. "Do you know why I've let you survive here for so long, Carter?" She didn't answer. "Because you have value. Because you have the ability to see things that others don't. But also because I thought you were smart enough to understand that sometimes we don't have any other choice." Serena took a deep breath, staring him down. "Maybe you're wrong. Maybe you're deluding yourself into thinking this world runs on ethics and kindness," Raymond smirked. "But let me tell you something, Carter. In this world, there are winners and losers. If you don't want to be a loser, you have to learn to accept reality." Serena felt the blood boil inside her. She knew she was standing at a critical crossroads. Either she accepted becoming part of this system, or she stood up against it. If this is how you run your company, then maybe I was wrong to think you were different. Raymond tilted his head, staring at her for a long moment. "Do you really think you can change this, Carter?" Serena didn't blink. "I know I can." No more words, just two gazes locked, an unspoken battle between two strong wills. Serena turned and left the office, but before she could reach the door handle, Raymond spoke one last time. "If you choose this path, Carter, you'll have to face the consequences on your own." Serena didn't turn back. "I'm ready." She walked out, leaving behind a slammed door and an unbridgeable crack between her and Raymond Holt. Serena stepped out of Raymond Holt's office, each step heavier than the last. The confrontation with him still haunted her mind, but not because she was afraid. It was because she knew she had reached a point of no return. Because now, she was no longer a part of Holt Dynamics. She couldn't accept a company willing to sacrifice thousands of lives just for a nice number on a financial report. And more importantly, she couldn't accept working under someone like Raymond, someone who believed that everything could be sacrificed, even his own son. She had learned so much from him, but it was also because of that she realized, if she stayed, she would become another version of Raymond Holt. 3 days after the confrontation with Raymond, Holt Dynamics was plunged into a new crisis. A series of internal emails were leaked, revealing that the company's leadership had deliberately covered up a serious issue with the safety system of a technology product they were developing. This product was designed to integrate into the operational systems of hospitals, automating the process of drug control, a major advancement in healthcare. But according to the leaked documents, the software contained a critical flaw that could result in dosage errors, directly endangering patients' lives. Raymond knew about the problem. The board knew about the problem. But instead of halting the product to fix the error, they decided to release it to the market, betting that the flaw wouldn't be discovered until they had made enough profit to deal with the consequences. Serena felt her whole body freeze as she read through these documents. Had they really gone this far? She didn't know who had leaked the information, but she knew what she had to do. She couldn't continue to turn a blind eye. The next day, Serena walked into Raymond's office for the last time. She didn't need an appointment. She didn't need to give a heads up. Raymond was waiting for her. He sat there behind his large desk, his eyes never leaving her as she walked over and placed a piece of paper on the table. Her resignation letter. Raymond didn't seem surprised. "I guessed you would do this," he said, his deep voice flat and emotionless. Serena didn't take her eyes off him. "I can't stay in a place I no longer trust." Raymond tilted his head slightly as if assessing her. "Do you think you can change the world from the outside, Carter?" Serena gave a small, tight-lipped smile, but there was no relief in it. "I know one thing for sure. If I stay here, I won't change anything." Raymond didn't speak for a long while. Then he picked up the letter, slowly scanning the words, before placing it back on the table, tapping his fingers lightly on the wood. "Do you know what awaits you out there?" "I do," Serena replied immediately. "You won't have any resources, no connections, no protection." Serena smiled cynically. "That's what people like you always think, that if we don't have power like you, we can't do anything. And you think you can prove the opposite?" Serena stared directly into his eyes, unwavering. "You'll see." Leaving Holt Dynamics wasn't easy. Serena had no money, no company backing her, no protection from powerful connections. But she had something more important than all of that: her will. She had spent too many years observing how the world worked, learning how people like Raymond manipulated the game. And now she would forge her own path. She didn't need to destroy Holt Dynamics to succeed. She just needed to build something they couldn't buy: trust. 3 days after Serena left Holt Dynamics, she received an unexpected call. "Ms. Carter, I think we need to meet." Serena froze, recognizing the familiar voice on the other end. Richard Vaughn, CEO of Orion Group, the man who had helped Holt Dynamics sign a deal with not long ago. "I don't work for Holt Dynamics anymore," she said plainly. "I know," Vaughn replied immediately. "That's why I'm calling you." Serena narrowed her eyes, a sense of caution rising. "What do you want?" There was a brief silence, then Vaughn spoke slowly, each word carrying weight. "I want to know if you're ready to start something new." Serena didn't answer immediately, but in her mind an idea began to take shape, and for the first time in days she felt a real spark of excitement. She was stepping into a new battle, a battle of her own. Many years had passed since Serena left Holt Dynamics, stepping out of the world of cold numbers and heartless decisions to build her own path. She was no longer the reckless intern trying to prove her worth. She had become a name of weight, someone who not only changed her own life, but also changed the game. But there was one thing that hadn't changed: Daniel. One spring morning, as Serena was leaving a meeting, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and her heart froze for a moment. Daniel. Before she could pick up, a message appeared. "Hi, Serena. I'm graduating this Saturday. Will you be there?" Serena blinked, a warm feeling spreading in her chest. She didn't need to think long. "Of course, kid." Serena stood in the middle of the university campus, surrounded by bright, youthful faces. None of the people in this crowd knew who she was. None of them knew that the woman in the sleek suit had once been a 17-year-old girl, sitting in a small diner, pushing a plate of cheese bread toward a lonely boy in the rain. But that didn't matter, because Daniel remembered. The boy who had sat in that wheelchair was now a 22-year-old man, wearing a graduation gown, his face no longer timid, but filled with confidence and determination. He rushed toward her the moment he spotted that familiar figure in the crowd. You really came. Serena smiled and wrapped him in a tight hug. I promised. Daniel looked up at her, his eyes shimmering with emotion. Do you know, if it wasn't for you, I might not be here today. Serena gently shook her head, holding his hand a little tighter. No, kid, you did it on your own. I was just lucky to be there along the way. He smiled softly but didn't argue, because they both knew the truth. As the ceremony ended and people began to disperse, Serena felt a pair of eyes watching her. She knew who it was before she even turned around. Raymond Holt stood there, a few steps away, in his familiar black suit. Time had not made him look older or weaker. It had only made his gray eyes sharper and deeper. Serena took a deep breath and walked over. I didn't think you would come. Raymond tilted his head slightly, his lips curling into a faint, almost unreadable smile. Do you think I would miss my son's big day? Serena paused for a moment. You've missed more than that. Raymond didn't argue. They stood there in silence amidst the noisy crowd, as if the whole world was slowly shrinking down to just the two of them. You've done well, Carter. Serena looked him straight in the eye, no anger like before, but a sense of acceptance. I don't need your approval. Raymond nodded slightly, showing no sign of wounded pride, only quiet respect. I know, but still, I'll say it. Serena smiled softly and turned to leave. Goodbye, Raymond. Raymond stood there, not calling her back. He simply watched her, as a man who had once had the chance to control everything, but this time he could only watch. Serena walked away, but this time she didn't walk alone. Daniel walked beside her, his face bright as he talked about his plans for the future. He was no longer the boy abandoned in the rain. He had found his own path. And so had Serena. Serena walked into the meeting room of her new company, where her name was engraved on the sign outside, Vice President of Orion Carter Enterprises. The name didn't just represent her, it represented a journey, an ideal, a path for people like her, those who were once considered worthless, those who were pushed aside by the world simply because they didn't have the right power or background, but now they had a place to belong. Serena was no longer the 17-year-old girl standing in the rain, trying to help a stranger. She had become someone capable of changing an entire system. And she wasn't doing it alone. On a December afternoon, Serena stood on the stage of a newly opened center. A large sign hung on the gate, boldly displaying the name Carter Holt Foundation. She looked down at the hundreds of people gathered, former workers who had lost their jobs due to harsh policies, young students who never thought they had a chance, people like her once upon a time, with nothing but the drive to rise above. They were all here for one reason. Serena took a deep breath, looked into the crowd, and began to speak. I used to think there were only two kinds of people in this world, the winners and the losers. I used to think that in order to survive, I had to accept the brutal decisions, to become a part of the system so I wouldn't be crushed by it. But I was wrong. She paused, her eyes scanning the faces before her. I realized there is something stronger than power. There is something stronger than money. It's an act of kindness. Because it was an act of kindness that changed my life. The crowd fell silent, hanging on every word. And that's why the Carter Holt Foundation exists. To bring opportunities to those who were once like me. Those who have talent, dreams, but no one to stand by them. Today, we're not just opening a building, we're opening a door. And anyone who's ready to walk through it will welcome them. The applause erupted like thunder, but Serena silently turned to look at the person standing beside her. Daniel. Daniel was much taller now, looking more grown up, but his eyes still shone with the same brightness as they had before. He was no longer the child huddled in a torn coat, shivering in the cold rain on Lexington Avenue. He was no longer a boy waiting for a busy father, unsure if anyone truly cared for him. He had become strong, someone who could stand on his own. Daniel turned to look at Serena, his smile a mix of pride and emotion. "You did it." Serena smiled softly and shook her head. "We did it." Daniel nodded, his gaze filled with faith. He knew this journey wasn't just Serena's, it belonged to both of them, and to everyone who was willing to believe in what the whole world had once rejected, that kindness could change everything. After the ceremony, Serena stepped out of the hall and stood on the steps, looking down the road ahead. She felt a gentle breeze pass by, carrying with it the memories of the years that had passed. A voice came from behind her. "You really did it, Carter." She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Raymond Holt stood there, in his familiar black suit, but this time something had changed. She no longer saw him as a ghost from her past. There had been battles between them, conflicts, irreconcilable differences, but in the end, both of them had arrived at the place they needed to be. "I didn't do it your way," Serena said slowly. Raymond nodded slightly. "But you won." Serena said nothing. Because she didn't need to beat him. She just needed to beat herself. She looked at him for a long moment, then gave a subtle nod before turning away, stepping down the steps toward Daniel. Serena's story wasn't one of a poor girl rising to success by chance. It was the story of a person who chose to stand up, even when the world turned its back on her. And it all began on a rainy night with an abandoned boy and a young girl who couldn't look away. Just one act of kindness, but it changed everything. One act of kindness can change a whole life, and sometimes it can change the world. A small act of kindness can change a whole life, and sometimes it can change the world. Serena Carter chose not to turn away, and that choice shaped her future, Daniel's future, and the lives of those once forgotten. Do you believe one act of kindness can make a difference? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to help spread these meaningful values.